I am a huge football fan. I love the NFL. I love college football. Just enjoy it all the way around as entertainment. I enjoy so few things these days, entertainment-wise, but I still enjoy the NFL. My favorite team is the Chicago Bears. I grew up in the mid-'80s, and the Bears, the 85 Chicago Bears, I was like 9 years old when they went to the Super Bowl, 10, and it made a fucking massive impact on me. Walter Payton, Refrigerator Perry, Mike Singletary, Otis Wilson. I always get those three linebackers. Richard Dent, Wilbur Marshall, Gary Fensick. I mean, I love the entire team. Jim McMahon, the great Sweetness, Walter Payton, Matt Suhey. I mean, we can go on and on. Tom Thayer, Van Horn, the great offensive line. Anyway, so the 85 Bears made a big impact on me, and I lived in Anchorage, Alaska, and the Seahawks were not very good. They were our local team, quote unquote. So I became a Bears fan. At the same time, I became a New York Mets fan as well because the Mets won the World Series in '86. So Darryl Strawberry, Dwight Gooden, a lot of those guys really made an impact on me heavily. Ron Darling. I mean, I can bore you with that. Anyway, this is about football, though. This is about the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears in this offseason, we have a quarterback by the name of Caleb Williams, a Heisman Trophy winner. He went to Oklahoma, and then he went to USC. And he was the number one pick last year of the 2024 draft. He had up and down rookie season. Threw like 20 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He had a good quote-unquote season. I've seen this season before, though, with rookie quarterbacks and second year, and I'm not as excited as I was at the beginning of the season. Let's just leave it that way. Leave it at that. So recently, after a tough season where the head coach was fired, the offensive coordinator was fired last year, Caleb was kind of on his own in a lot of ways. He had a lot of quarterback coaches and run game guys and passing game coordinators. And the NFL is silly with coaches, right? And recently, the Bears hired Ben Johnson, who was the most desired head coaching candidate in the league. He was the offensive coordinator from the Detroit Lions. And he has turned the Detroit Lions, or been one of the play caller for the Detroit Lions offense. To all accounts, everybody likes Ben Johnson. He's really smart, whatever. This is a story I've heard before, I've seen before. The boy genius offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator goes to a team and struggles, and he's not a head coach, and people are like, oh, he's not a head coach, but we thought he was going to be. And anyway, Ben Johnson will get a chance. We'll see how he does. I am not optimistic about the Bears' upcoming season. And it didn't just start with this recent story that's coming out. That was also talked about last year before the draft, but that Caleb Williams' dad, I don't remember his name and I don't care, Carl Williams, came out and has said, by the way, his son is in his 20s. Like, stop. I know. Fucking nothing worse than the dad who talks about their son's sports careers. Like, shut the fuck up. Like, be quiet. You got him to the point he's a millionaire. Let him, he's an adult. He'll figure it out on his own. I mean, come on. But anyway, he did this interview with, I think, Seth Wickersham from ESPN, and it's going to come out in a month or so. And it's about how Caleb Williams didn't want to go to Chicago in the first place. Now, this was talked about when Caleb Williams was being drafted, that he was having reservations about going to Chicago because Chicago does not develop quarterbacks. It has a terrible history of, particularly with the last two quarterbacks that the Bears drafted in the first round, with Mitch Trubisky, who went third overall, and Justin Fields, who I think went 11th overall, if I'm not mistaken. I can't exactly remember. But those two quarterbacks are no longer with Chicago. Both are, one's a starting quarterback with the Jets, and I think Trubisky's a backup in Buffalo, if I'm the last I heard. Anyway, neither one of these players that were drafted were as good as Caleb Williams was in college. Justin Fields had a decent career, one good year at Ohio State, but always was limited throwing the football. Great athlete, but not a great passer. Mitch Trubisky had one above average year at UNC and was overdrafted, and that was, of course, the Pat Mahomes draft. So, but the Bears are now, we have Caleb Williams. And Caleb Williams claims that the offensive coordinator, they would just make him watch film by himself. Now, if anybody knows anything about coaching or the NFL, that is a lie. I think it is a lie, and I think what Carl Williams and Caleb are doing is trying to spin why they had, or at least his dad are trying to spin why Caleb had such a bad rookie season. because Caleb Williams doesn't anticipate, meaning he doesn't throw the ball if the guy isn't wide open or he can't see that the receiver is open. That doesn't work in the NFL. It works in college, but it doesn't work in the NFL. You have to anticipate. You have to throw guys open. He doesn't do that well. He doesn't read defenses particularly well because in college, he really wasn't asked to intricately read defenses. His head coach was Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley has coached 3 Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks, Kyler Murray, and the quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Baker Mayfield. Both those guys won Heismans. Caleb Williams won Heisman as well under Lincoln Riley's leadership. And so, but the offense is not a pro offense. And in fact, Lincoln Riley the last few years has been kind of exposed as this offense is really simple. It schemes wide open wide receivers against inferior talent. You're not playing against NFL talent every week. You're playing against guys who are, most of them are not going to the NFL. Their last game they'll ever play in football will be in college anyway. So Caleb's dad has come out and now blaming the coaching staff from last year, Shane Waldron, the offensive coordinator who was fired, blaming Matt Eberflus, and claiming that Caleb really wasn't coached or really wasn't, and which I don't believe at all. Now, I do believe after watching Hard Knocks last year, Hard Knocks, the HBO series that spends the preseason with one NFL team, and then last year they spent it with the Chicago Bears. You could tell Matt Eberflus, who was the head coach at the time, who was a defensive coordinator with the Indianapolis Colts before, you could tell he had no juice. I call it juice. He would interview Caleb, and you could tell there was an alpha in the room, and it wasn't Matt Eberflus, it was Caleb. And I think Caleb was called a generational talent. He was been called Pat Mahomes-like. He's been all these things where he was called. So I think when he got into the building, he was already a star. He had already made millions of dollars in NIL money. He has a Heisman Trophy. He was a high-profile player, first overall pick. So I think they thought he was going to come in and kind of run the offense. And they didn't watch the film of him in college, apparently, or they did, and they just didn't see that he needed NFL coaching. He needed 3, 5, 7-step drop help. He needed help reading defenses. Where's the safety coming? What does shell coverage look like? What do I do in man coverage? What do I do in a zone read? An RPO situation. He didn't do anything well because Caleb plays a style of football that is based on his athleticism. He's a natural thrower of the football. He's one of the best throwers of the football in the league right now. There's only 3 or 4 guys that can make the throws that Caleb can make. And he's athletic as hell. The problem is he relies entirely too much on it. Because when you're the most athletic guy on the field, and you're a quarterback, you often show that you're the most athletic guy in the field. He would roll out of the pocket. He would, in college, he'd roll out of the pocket, or he would create plays with his feet because he was so much more athletic than the people he was playing. In the NFL, that doesn't work. And he took a lot of unforced errors as far as sacks were concerned. That got blamed on his offensive line. Rightly so in some cases, but a lot of cases, I would say about a third of the sacks that Caleb took were self-inflicted. He doesn't like to throw the ball away. There's a whole thing with quarterbacks not throwing the ball away. It kind of hit Shedeur Sanders as well. See, incompletions fuck with your completion percentage, and it fucks with your QB rating. But sacks don't. So unless you use advanced metrics like PFF or others who kind of add in the sacks and add in the mistakes and don't always blame the other players, like drops. Not every drop is the quarterback's fault, and not every drop is the receiver's fault. So they're a little more nuanced. But QB ratings are based on completion percentage, distance of balls thrown, touchdowns to interception ratio, and yards. And it's a metric that's been used for the last 35, 40 plus years in the NFL. Anyway, so Caleb is acutely aware of this, and there was one of the criticisms of Shedeur Sanders that he would take sacks so it wouldn't fuck with his QBR, and it wouldn't mess with his percentage, throwing percentage, that kind of shit. It's an ego thing. It's about yards. It's about numbers, that kind of thing. And I'm not saying that's all Caleb did, because that would be inaccurate. Caleb didn't just take sacks so he could protect his own statistics, but he did take a lot of unnecessary sacks. And then the offensive line, of course, would get blamed for it. And thus the upheaval this offseason, where the Bears brought in 3 offensive linemen, 2 of which were injured last year, and 1 is over 35 or 33 or 34, whatever he is, in Tooney. I personally believe that, like I said, Caleb's dad is bullshitting and making excuses for his son, and has some legitimate points. The head coach was fired in the middle of the season. The offensive coordinator was fired. And Ben Johnson was brought in and a whole new team of people. The problem with all of this is that the offseason, every team's offseason, people forget about the offseason before. Last year, offseason, the Bears won the offseason. They were the big winners. Oh, look what they brought in the draft. They drafted Caleb, and they drafted Rome Odunze, who had a mediocre at best, almost below average rookie year for a receiver. We brought in, they had 4 picks last year, and with the fourth round pick, they took a fucking punter. Ryan Poles was so confident in his roster that he picked a punter with the 4th round. Only 4 picks. Took one offensive lineman, and he is a project offensive lineman who got beat like a fucking mule last year when he played. Ryan Poles is not a good general manager. He took advantage of the Carolina Panthers and got a good trade that ended up with the Bears getting the first overall pick with Caleb Williams. But he has not been a great general manager. The players he takes, we should have, so I'll give you an example. The first round of this year, the Bears had the 10th pick, and they drafted a fucking tight end. Colston Loveland from fucking Michigan. A run-first offense. And Colston Loveland may be great, but we didn't need to draft a tight end, especially at 10. And instead of picking an offensive lineman up, interior, or a defensive lineman up, because football is won in the trenches. It is not won by wide receivers. It is not won by tight ends. It is not won by fucking, by even the quarterback. As good as a quarterback is, if you don't have an offensive line that can protect him, and that you don't have bullies up there and guys who want to knock, you can't do any of the shit that Ben Johnson wants to do in his offense that he did with Detroit. Ben Johnson benefited from a terrific head coach and a terrific general manager and great talent evaluators who built the offensive and defensive lines first. They built inside out. What did Ryan Poles do this year? He drafted a tight end, and then in the second round with a high pick, he drafted a fucking wide receiver. What the fuck are you doing drafting a wide receiver in the second round? You do not, I don't care how good Luther Burden is going to be. I don't even know. He had a shitty last season. He had a shitty, senior year, junior year, whatever it was. I don't care. You do not draft a wide receiver on a team that does not need a wide receiver. We signed the guy Zacchaeus from Washington. We have Rome Odunze and DJ Moore. We're good at wide receiver. But what does he do? He drafted his best player available, which is not what you do when you're trying to build a team in the trenches. And everybody's losing their mind over, we had a really solid draft. And then later in the draft, of course, he picked up an offensive lineman. He picked up a defensive lineman. And we really had a need at running back. And what does he do? Instead of any of those rounds drafting a running back, he waited until the 7th round and drafted some fucking running back who's probably not even going to make the team. The problem, Ryan Poles is not even good at his job. He is showing that he made one good trade, and because Carolina is so brutally incompetent that they've gone through, they're on their 3rd head coach since then or whatever it's been. They've overhauled their team. They're one of the worst franchises because they have an owner who's an idiot, David Tepper. Anyway, but Ryan Poles now is faced with do or die. You hired the head coach, the offensive coordinator that everybody wanted as their head coach. You got him. You overpaid him. You went out and you spent a bunch of money on guys and traded assets to get older offensive linemen who are not healthy. Two of them missed significant amount of time last year. Our depth is not great at the offensive line. I would have spent the first 3 picks offensive linemen. I would have spent our first 3 fucking picks on offensive linemen. I don't care if they hit or not. I need depth on the trenches. Either offensive or defensive line. We passed on pass rushers. We passed on impact players on defense to draft a fucking wide receiver. And if Ben Johnson had anything to do with that, and he's in Brian Poles' ear, he probably should shut up. Because that's not what you do when you're building a team. This team, I heard this last year. Caleb Williams is walking into the best situation that any rookie quarterback ever has, which was horseshit. It was nonsense. And it's happening again. And I'm having to watch local Bears media tell me how great all this is. And listen and support Caleb Williams. And when Ryan Poles gets fired next year and the new GM comes in, he will be saddled with a head coach he didn't hire and a quarterback he didn't draft. And that's more interesting. The Bears at best are going to win 8 games this year if they're lucky. Thank you for listening. And fuck, I hate being a Bears fan.